I thought he was just another creepy old carny trying to flirt. But then he whispered something no one else should have known, not even my parents. It happened the summer I turned 17 at one of those small-town traveling fairs that seemed to pop up overnight, like mushrooms after rain. You know, the kind flickering lights, faded prizes, loud music warped by cheap speakers, and people who look like they've been running games for 100 years. My friends and I went mostly out of boredom. Small town, not much else to do. Ride the rides, eat some fried junk, take pictures for Instagram standard stuff. We were walking past the midway when a voice called out behind us. "Step right up, sweetheart. Let me guess your weight. Win a prize." I turned and saw the booth. A wooden platform scale, dented and worn, with stuffed animals strung overhead like mummified trophies. The man running it looked old. Not just in the normal way. He looked like someone who had been left in the sun, two long deep creases in his face. Yellowing eyes, hair like cobwebs under a tilted top hat. But he smiled wide when I turned his way. My friends giggled and nudged me forward. "Come on, what's the worst that could happen?" they said. I rolled my eyes but stepped onto the scale. It clanked under my feet. The barker tilted his head and squinted at me, like he was reading more than just numbers. He said, dragging the word out. "You look like ... 122, I laughed. "Close, I'm 124. He grinned and handed me a deflated purple bear. "Hey, good enough," he said. But then he leaned in, far too close, and whispered, "Happy birthday, Olivia Grace. March 27th, right?" I froze. I never told him my name or my birthday. I hadn't handed him a ticket, hadn't shown an ID. There were no names on display. Nothing. I started to back away when he added one more thing. Soft. Almost playful. "And you never told anyone what happened behind your dad's shed, did you?" I felt like I'd been slapped. My ears rang, my mouth went dry, because I hadn't told anyone. Not about that day when I was 9. Not about the neighbor boy, or the screaming, or the broken jar of fireflies. Not even my therapist knew. I dropped the stuffed bear and ran. My friends laughed at first, thinking I was messing around. Then they caught up to me near the snack booths and saw my face. I told them what he said. They got quiet, tried to reassure me, said maybe he'd guessed. Maybe he overheard something. Or maybe it was a trick carnies were good at cold reading, right? I wanted to believe them. Until I went back the next day. I told myself I'd confront him, demand an explanation. Maybe I'd catch him using some app, reading some social media post I'd forgotten was public. Anything, but the booth was gone. Not just closed gone. The scale, the prizes, the peeling paint, all of it. I asked around. The other workers just shrugged. One of them, a younger guy with a lip ring, said the fair hadn't had a guess your weight booth in years. I asked if there had been an older man, pale, wiry, with a top hat. The guy's face darkened. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "If someone like that talks to you, don't talk back." He wouldn't explain what he meant. Just walked away. That night I found the stuffed bear in my room. I never brought it home. It was sitting on my pillow, its glassy eyes staring straight ahead. Around its neck, tied with a dirty red string, was a torn scrap of paper. On it, written in small, precise letters, were 3 more things I'd never told a soul. I burned the paper. I threw the bear in the dumpster. But sometimes when the wind rattles the windows at night, I still hear him outside like he's setting up a booth just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting for me to step forward again. And every birthday since then, I find something under my bed. Just a little gift, a reminder that he remembers, that he's not guessing. He knows. The chair was still warm when we went back in, but whoever or whatever had been sitting in it was already gone. I worked a summer job with a traveling Carnival the year after I graduated high school. It was one of those off-brand, cash-only outfits that changed names depending on what town we were in. I wasn't doing it for the thrill, I just needed money. And carnivals always needed bodies willing to work for little sleep and less pay. The crew was rough, but mostly chill. We slept in rusty trailers parked behind the game booths, or, if you were new like me, on folding cots in the open air. There was one large white tent set up behind the rides, though reserved for staff meetings, managers, and what the rest of us called carny royalty. We weren't supposed to go in there unless called. But one night, after closing, I realized I'd left my jacket in the break area inside that tent. It had started to drizzle, and the air had that cold, static charge you only feel right before a real storm rolls in. Most of the crew were either asleep or drinking near the fire pit, so I figured no one would notice if I slipped inside for 30 seconds. The tent was quiet, lit only by a dying overhead bulb that buzzed like it was choking on flies. I stepped inside slowly, eyes adjusting to the flickering shadows. That's when I saw him, a clown, just sitting there in the back corner on a folding chair like he'd been waiting. He was facing slightly away from me, but I could still see his white painted face and profile. The makeup was cracked, old. His wig was a tangled mess of faded red curls, and his oversized yellow shoes were dirty, almost moldy looking. But what got me, what froze me, was his expression. His mouth was painted into a wide, toothy grin that didn't match the dead look in his eyes, and he wasn't moving, not breathing, not blinking, just staring at the center of the tent as if something was going to walk in at any moment. I waited, thinking maybe he hadn't heard me. Maybe it was some new act I didn't know about. But the longer I stood there, the more wrong it felt. The air inside that tent was thick like it had been sealed up for days. Dusty, stale. It didn't smell like any clown I'd ever met. It smelled like old wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic. I cleared my throat. "Hey, sorry, man." Just grabbing my jacket. Nothing. No response. No nod. No twitch. Just silence. I backed away slowly, eyes locked on him the whole time until I was out of the tent. When I got back to the trailers, I asked the others who the new clown was. At first, they laughed. Then they got quiet. "We didn't have a clown act," they said. "Not this season. We used to years ago, but the guy had quit or disappeared long before I joined. I insisted I saw someone. They insisted I didn't." A couple of the older carnies, ones who'd been with the show since way before I got there, gave each other a weird look. Then the manager, Dennis, stood up and said, "Let's go take a look." We went back to the tent together, me, Dennis, and one of the older guys named Hank. When we opened the flap and stepped inside, the place was empty. No clown, no chair in the back corner, except ... there was a chair, folded and pushed aside. When Dennis reached out and touched it, he pulled his hand back. Still warm. "Probably someone screwing around," he muttered, but I could see it in his face. He wasn't convinced. We all walked back in silence, and that night I slept with my hoodie pulled tight over my face, listening to the wind howl through the empty rides. At about 3 a.m., the Gravitron, an old spinning ride we kept chained up and powered down for safety, turned on by itself. The sound was unmistakable, that low mechanical whine, followed by the rising hum of the platform as it spun faster and faster. A couple of us ran out of our bunks, thinking someone had broken in. Dennis got there first with the keys to the breaker panel. It was still locked. He cut the main power, and the ride eventually slowed to a stop. When we opened the ride's control booth, everything was in place, except the emergency stop button had been pressed in. From the inside, nobody spoke after that. Nobody wanted to. We left town the next morning, a day ahead of schedule. Later, while packing up, I found a playing card jammed into the hinges of the staff tent door. It was soaked from the rain, but still legible, the Joker. Drawn in black ink, its smile far too wide. And at the bottom, in faded red marker, someone had written, "Thanks for visiting." I never went back. I rode the Ferris wheel to be alone, but when I got off, they told me I hadn't been. It happened last summer in a small town I was only passing through. My boyfriend and I were on one of those classic, this trip will fix everything vacations, the kind you plan in desperation when things have already started falling apart. We'd been fighting the whole drive, snapping at each other over dumb things, missed exits, forgotten snacks, playlists. By the time we reached a little county fair on the edge of town, I was done talking. He offered to buy tickets, try to make things right, but I told him I needed a minute to clear my head and wandered off. The fair was small, old, the kind of place where the rides looked like they'd been trucked in from a scrapyard and patched together with leftover bolts. There were flashing lights and the smell of cotton candy, but none of it felt cheery. It felt tired, like everything there had seen better years. That's probably why the Ferris wheel appealed to me. It was set off to the side, away from the crowd, turning slow and steady under a string of flickering bulbs. I figured a few quiet minutes at the top would help me cool off. I bought my ticket and didn't wait for my boyfriend. I just stepped onto the ride when it was my turn, sat down in the worn vinyl seat, and let the ride operator pull the metal bar across my lap. He didn't say a word, just gave me a nod and flipped a lever. The wheel began its slow, creaky climb. I leaned back, letting the wind brush against my face, and watched the fair shrink beneath me. The lights below blurred a little through my tired eyes, and for the first time that night, I felt calm. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, but then I felt something shift. It was subtle, like the seat dipped ever so slightly, the way it does when someone else shifts their weight next to you. My eyes flew open, and I turned my head instinctively, heart skipping a beat. But there was no one there. The seat beside me was empty. I laughed a little at myself, tried to shake it off. Maybe the wind was stronger than I thought. Maybe the ride was just that rickety. I didn't look again. I just rode it out in silence. When the ride ended, I stepped off and thanked the operator, short man with gray hair and a red vest who looked like he hadn't smiled in years. He looked at me kind of funny, then asked, "Your friend not getting off?" I blinked. "What?" "The guy that was ridden with you," he said, furrowing his brow. Tall, black hoodie. Didn't say a word. Thought he was with you. I froze, trying to process what he just said. I was alone. He stared at me for a long moment, then looked toward the now empty cart and back at me. No, he said quietly. You weren't. He radioed someone, probably maintenance, and asked them to check the wheel. I stood off to the side, confused and more than a little creeped out, while another man ran the ride through a quick loop. There was no one there, obviously. No stowaway hiding in a cart. The other guy shrugged and said maybe the operator had just seen someone from a different seat and gotten confused. They acted like it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell from the way the older man looked at the Ferris wheel that he wasn't convinced. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye inside the small booth next to the ride. There was a black and white monitor showing live security footage from around the fair. One of the feeds was a high-angle view of the Ferris wheel, my cart, near the top. I paused. I could see myself clear as day looking out over the fair, legs crossed, jacket zipped to my chin, and beside me, something else, a shape, slouched, unmoving. It looked like someone hunched forward in a hoodie, the hood drawn over their face. I felt my stomach drop. I turned to the operator, pointed at the screen, asked, "Who is that?" When I looked back, the shape was gone. Same feed, same seat. Still me, still alone. I left quickly after that. I told my boyfriend what happened, but he brushed it off. Said the old guy was probably confused, and that the camera had glitched or lagged or whatever. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild. That's what I wanted to believe. But 2 days later, while we were unpacking at a motel, I found something tucked inside the pocket of the jacket I'd been wearing that night. A strip of red fabric, worn, stained, and unmistakably a seatbelt strap from a Carnival ride. It was still buckled, still looped, like it had been torn straight from the cart, and it smelled faintly of rust, but not metal rust, more like something old, something damp, something that had been buried. I threw it away. I don't go to fairs anymore. I don't ride Ferris wheels, and I definitely don't sit in empty seats. Because now I know, sometimes they're not actually empty.